Morning Tang, Hula Dunya. Many thanks to all concerned, both here and elsewhere, for your good wishes and your kind words. The next item of business is a statement by Fiona Hislop on the economy and COVID-19. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. Fiona Hislop.
And welcome, Presiding Officer. The COVID-19 public health crisis has led extremely quickly to an economic crisis which is global in nature but also very local, impacting on many people and businesses in Scotland. To combat the spread of the virus, many businesses have already closed, and we face an enormous challenge in helping other businesses to survive, to provide jobs and to service the economy. Can I thank all businesses and their workers following the social distancing guidance, the essential work sectors and supply chains for continuing to keep the country running, and those companies who have repurposed to manufacture supplies for the health sector. We estimate that up to 70% of the workforce is still working, many delivering health, care and welfare, but many others working from home and often combined with childcare and homeschooling. By staying home, they are playing their part in tackling the virus. They are helping to protect the health service and save lives. As COVID-19 continues to have a significant impact across the world, there is major uncertainty in financial markets, supply chains and the functioning of the global economy, as many countries, including Scotland, have had to reduce economic activity to stop the spread of the virus. Latest surveys for Scotland show a similar pattern to other countries, with falls in business activity in March, sharper even than during the financial crisis. The Chief Economist's State of the Economy report, published today, projects that Scottish GDP will fall by a third during the period of social distancing. It is important, however, to put the economic impacts in context. This is no normal downturn, and we need to view economic data and projections in that light, recognising that productive and profitable businesses across Scotland have been required to pause activity to support the public health effort. We have pursued three main aims for the economic response to date: to keep companies in business with productive capacity so that they can recover, to keep staff in employment with appropriate income protection and support, and most importantly, to provide support to staff so that they can self-isolate and provide care to loved ones. It is in everyone's interest to help companies through this turbulent period. The UK Government has the immediate fiscal and macroeconomic powers to respond to this economic crisis and have made substantial, welcome commitments to support businesses and employees. However, it doesn't fully meet the needs of Scottish businesses. There are still significant gaps in both the job retention scheme and the support for the self-employed. Last week, along with the Finance Secretary, I wrote to the Chancellor outlining the changes that need to be made. I'm also pressing the UK Government to urgently share data on implementation of support schemes, so we are better able to tailor our support to businesses. To address Scotland's specific needs, we announced additional funding to fill some gaps in the UK Government schemes. There is no doubt that we will be dealing with the uncertainty of the impacts and duration of this virus for some time. I engage regularly with businesses, business organisations and the unions, building consensus in recent weeks in support of our four-step economic plan: response, reset, restart and recover. Initially, we have focused the majority of our efforts on the response stage. Our package of business support is now worth more than £2.2 billion and is delivering almost £900 million of rates relief, and we continue to work with local authorities to progress our £1.3 billion business grant scheme. There is support to the fishing industry of up to £22.5 million announced by the Rural Economy Secretary, and the Transport Secretary has agreed further measures to support the bus industry of £92 million, ferry operators of £45.7 million and rail franchisees of £254 million. We continue to work closely with the UK Government, Oil and Gas UK, to assess what more can be done to support the sector during its immediate and longer-term challenges. The Trade Minister has been working on procuring international and domestic supplies for the health service. On Saturday, 10 million masks arrived at Prestwick Airport, and over the course of this week, 100,000 litres of sanitizer will arrive at the NHS Central Distribution Warehouse. And our enterprise organisations have provided advice and support to over 178,000 companies. The additional £100 million we allocated last week will be a vital lifeline for Scottish individuals and businesses to relieve hardship, protecting the newly self-employed, ineligible for other support, and viable micro and SME businesses in distress who may be ineligible for UK government sources of funding or not in receipt yet of the funds they need to survive. The grant funding will be channeled through local authorities and enterprise agencies and open for applications by the end of April, with the recipients receiving funds in early May. The provisional allocation will see £34 million for the newly self-employed, £20 million for creative, tourism and hospitality companies not in receipt of business rates relief, and £45 million for vulnerable but vital firms to Scotland's local and national economic foundations. The recently self-employed, excluded from the UK scheme but suffering hardship, will be able to receive £2,000 grants. For creative, tourist and hospitality companies of up to 50 employees, there will be easy access to £3,000 hardship grants or larger grants up to £25,000 where it can be demonstrated it is needed. The support and grants for pivotal SME enterprises will depend on the specific need for the enterprise and be developed by the relevant enterprise agency with wraparound support. I also recognise the challenges faced in the cultural sector, so reliant on social interaction in theatres, music venues, galleries and festivals. For artists facing hardship, I was pleased to announce yesterday an additional £1 million to Creative Scotland's Bridging Bursaries Fund. Because of our decisions, thousands more businesses, including some vital sectors of the economy, benefit from support not available elsewhere in the UK. There will still be gaps, so we continue to engage with businesses on a regular basis to understand their needs and press the UK Government to deliver for them. The reset phase we are now entering involves preparation to know what a safe restart will look like sector by sector across the economy and what needs to be done to help businesses deliver this. Together with industry sector leads and trade unions, we are developing sector-by-sector guidance to give assurance and confidence as closed businesses at some point reopen and restart economic activity, but only when the scientific and health advice supports it. For example, the Housing Minister and the Construction Leadership Group, the Construction Leadership Forum have formed a cross-industry group to address the wider issues needed to get the industry started again following lockdown. Over the coming months, our plan for economic restart and recovery will need to be managed in a safe and orderly way. Public sector spending on infrastructure accounts for around 50% of all construction activity across Scotland, so our infrastructure investment will play a vital role in how we reset, restart and recover the economy. So far, only essential construction activity continues in the sectors delivering critical national infrastructure, such as primary healthcare, energy, telecoms, transport and water. These networks and systems are vital to our ability to keep our country moving and sustain as much economic activity as possible in the current crisis. As we all know, our digital infrastructure has proved to be an essential lifeline for people, businesses and services across Scotland. The restart itself may be phased, and a slower but more effective restart will reduce the danger of a second wave of the virus and avoid a false restart for the economy requiring further closures. On recovery, it will not be quick, and the post-crisis world will be very different, with different business practices, different markets and different behaviours. Last week I announced the establishment of an economic recovery advisory group. I'm sure members will agree that independent expert advice is more important than ever. This group will be steered by Benny Higgins and will include Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli. The challenge I have set for this group is to engage and analyse and listen to those being affected by this crisis and to bring forward solutions to enable our economy to recover quicker and better. Mr Higgins will lead engagement with the business community alongside the enterprise organisations. And I'm pleased that Lord Smith, Chair of Scottish Enterprise, has agreed to be part of this process to gather the views on the business aspects of the economic response. And we will go wider with active engagement with trade unions, local government, third sector and environment representatives, because how the economy recovers is relevant to everyone. And I'm setting a demanding timetable with proposals to government by the end of June. These proposals will be taken forward alongside a range of other sources of expert policy advice as we implement the government's agenda to build a well-being economy and to ensure a green recovery. The advisory group will draw on input from the Council of Economic Advisers. And I can now announce further members of the group, including Dame Sue Bruce, Professor Anne Vigneault, Professor Dieter Helm, Graham Smith and Professor John Kane. To conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government recognises the significant impact that the response to COVID-19 is having on Scotland's economy, businesses and people. We are doing everything we can to mitigate that impact, responding to the crisis and resetting as much economic activity as we can. At the same time, we are planning ahead to restart the economy and, in due course, to support economic recovery.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in their statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call Donald Cameron.
Deputy Presiding Officer, I believe that it's Maurice Golden who's going to answer first.
In that case, that's the first substitution of the afternoon. I'll call Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of the statement. We all recognise this is an incredibly challenging time for the economy, but now is the time to plan on how we rebuild our economy in the long term, and I welcome that planning has begun, and I look forward to seeing the detail around this. Of course, businesses must be able to survive to get to that stage, which is why, despite last week's partial U-turn, it is disappointing that business support in Scotland still falls short of England. For example, a Scottish retail, leisure or hospitality business requires a rateable value of £18,000 to qualify for a £25,000 grant versus just £15,000 in England. Scottish businesses also don't receive a full grant for each additional property as English firms do. A snapshot of just 4 Scottish businesses who have contacted me shows they are disadvantaged by over £300,000. The figure across Scotland must be millions. Will the Cabinet Secretary rectify this disparity?
Can I say to the member, in absolute good faith, we are working very hard to make sure that we can complement and supplement and fill those gaps that exist from the UK schemes to reflect Scotland's economy. And that is why we have more support for fishing, for agriculture, while we're supporting SMEs, while we're making sure that our very strong business space can be supported in the ways I have just outlined in this new announcement. Can I also say our small business bonus scheme is far more generous than the rest of the UK and has been for some time, which also means that there are more people that can benefit and more businesses up to £18,000 are benefiting. There are companies that in England between £15,000 and £18,000 are not currently benefiting. And can I say in good spirit as well, there are many, many companies that will now be able to receive those multiple properties grants, not only just for the £25,000 area, but distinctly in Scotland, also for the £10,000 grant as well, not available in England. And finally, one of the examples that was brought to my attention was for a firm that, with the current receipt from the Scottish Government, will receive £425,000, and that's before they get the 80% of wages in relation to the job retention scheme. There are companies just now who are getting nothing. So please bear with us. Please reflect the needs of Scotland, and please make sure that we can be reflective and responsive of Scotland's economy and every single part of Scotland as we do so.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you, and can I begin by congratulating you, Deputy Presiding Officer, on your new elevation. And can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement, which confirmed what was in the Government's press release this morning, where the Cabinet Secretary explained that in the face of skyrocketing unemployment and a 33% collapse in Scotland's economic output, that the Scottish Government's response to the economic recovery phase is to set up yet another independent advisory group. Cabinet Secretary, you've already got an infrastructure commission, a poverty and inequality commission, a just transition commission, a climate change plan working group, a strategic board for enterprise and skills, a fair work convention, and an already existing council of economic advisers. So will the Cabinet Secretary accept the scepticism of the Fraser of Allender Institute and others, that we don't need yet another government advisory committee made up of advisers already on existing advisory committees? We need a plan for action and a plan for jobs and the resources to back it up. So will the Cabinet Secretary make her business that to be delivered?
Cabinet Secretary.
This morning, the Chief Economist set out and laid bare the major impact that COVID-19 is placing, not just in Scotland's economy, but elsewhere as well. And that's an immediate reduction of 30% in relation to GDP. Now, that did not happen as a result of the financial crisis. It's not happened in any other significant crisis that we've had. Indeed, if you look at international experts, they recognise that this will be the biggest decline since the Great Depression. So does that need action? Absolutely it does. But it also needs short, sharp, effective coordination to bring together that recovery plan that I have demanded to see before the end of June to ensure that we can actually mobilise all of Scotland. This is the time when we've mobilised all of Scotland on a public health response. It's time now to mobilise all of Scotland in relation to our economic response as well. And that is to make sure that we mobilise all those aspects that are already working in different areas, absolutely. But this is unlike anything else. It needs a response unlike anything else. And that is why my four-step plan, which has been accepted and understood right across the sector, the business sector, and also I've discussed with trade unions, is the right way forward. It's about saving jobs, but it's also making sure that when we save lives, there are also livelihoods that we can protect as we go forward as well.
Thank you. We move to the open questions. Andy Whiteman, to be followed by Mike Rumbles.
Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement and the welcome report from the Chief Economist today. In her statement, she said, and I quote, that she was pressing the UK Government to urgently share data on implementation of support schemes. Given that request, can she confirm that Scottish ministers will also be equally transparent and publish on a regular basis the allocation of COVID-19 business support funding and to be published in an open data format as requested by the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee in the letter to her of last week?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think it's very important that we can share what data we can. We've already shared today information in relation to the business support that has been provided. Indeed, that has been improved over the last week since we had the first information, and I'm happy to make sure that that's circulated to members as soon as possible. So I do agree that it's important to understand the data. We need to know, for example, in relation to the CBILS scheme, what percentage of companies are actually accessing that in Scotland, and also, for example, in the issue about saving jobs, those companies with a turnover over £45 million. They're a significant number in Scotland, very important and strategic to our country. Previously, the CBILS scheme would not allow them to have access to funding. Myself and indeed colleagues from Wales in our regular discussions with the UK ministers encouraged them to open up a scheme for the 45 million plus, but also to make sure in terms of borrowing it's sufficient to help those companies survive. So I do agree that transparent allocation of funding and the progress of that and the reporting of that is important, and I will closely at the request from the letter from the committee, and indeed I expect to be able to respond positively to it.
Thank you very much. Mike Rumbles, to be followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and congratulations to you in your new role. I have a letter from the trade union Prospect, which represents 900 freelancers in Scotland's TV and film industry. Now, these freelancers were encouraged by government to move from self-employment to become employees, paying their taxes through PAYE. They all had multiple employers, though, and so are specifically excluded from furloughing, but they have lost all their income. HMRC have all their tax records, just like the self-employed, and they've been left out of the aid package for the self-employed, which uses the very same tax records. Now, while I very much welcome, unlike some others, the Scottish Government stepping into some of these gaps, which you have done, particularly the one-off Bridging Bursaries Fund grant, which I think the Minister is responsible for, to help freelancers. But the National Secretary of Prospect asks in his letter to us, what else can be done for our freelancers in Scotland's creative sector who have maybe got this one-off payment, but it's very welcome, but it's not what is being offered to others.
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I say to the member, I absolutely agree with him. It's one of the key concerns we have with the UK self-employed scheme. We continue to press them on this because this is an important part of our sector. Prior to COVID, creative industries was one of the fastest growing sectors, not just in Scotland, but across the rest of the UK, and I will continue to do that. In the meantime, there are 2 schemes to help freelancers in the creative sector. He's already referred to the Creative Scotland Bridging Bursary, which has now been increased by another £2 million. It's been very much welcomed by those that are in receipt of it, and it's moved very quickly and simply to address that issue. There's also one for Screen, which Scottish Screen, our Screen Scotland organisation are deploying as well for broadcasters in that area. But he reflects a very distinct area where there may be strategic companies that need help. So therefore, one of the areas that they might be able to look at is that £20 million fund that I referred to, particularly for some of those that are not in receipt of non-domestic rates relief, which I think a number of the companies he's just referred to may be categorised in that way.
Thank you. Annabel Ewing, to be followed by Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too offer my congratulations on your appointment. Whilst it is clear that local authority officials have been working tirelessly to process grant applications, I am conscious nonetheless of the significant volume of applications which are being submitted. Will the Cabinet Secretary confirm that she will engage further with local authorities to ensure that they are taking every possible step such that applications can be processed as quickly as possible, thereby ensuring that small businesses in my constituency of Cowdenbeath and indeed across the country can receive into their bank accounts these literally lifeline Scottish Government grants as soon as possible?
The Cabinet Secretary for Economy has indicated that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance will answer this question. Kate Forbes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I agree with the member. Local authorities are working tirelessly just now in order to distribute business grants. And as at 14th of April last week, Scottish local authorities had approved over 18,000 grants at a value of £215 million, and that number is increasing on a daily basis. But I recognise that this is a lifeline, and we have built into the guidance that we share with local authorities an element of discretion. We continue to work closely with them in order to monitor progress on the scheme and identify where we can offer additional assistance. In terms of the process, local authorities are regularly identifying issues which are then considered more carefully by Scottish Government officials and local authorities in order to determine what the right answer is for a business. And secondly, I would expect every local authority to have a review or an appeals process where an outcome has not gone in favour of the business applying. So we will keep monitoring these issues in order to ensure that as many businesses get the support that they need.
Thank you very much. Donald Cameron, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary mentioned in her statement the construction sector, which is one area where the current guidance on staying open is different in Scotland compared with the rest of the UK. When the time comes, will the Cabinet Secretary give specific consideration to restarting that sector as quickly but as safely as possible, given its importance to both the national economy and local economies across Scotland, especially in rural areas, such as the Highlands and Islands, where construction projects tend to be smaller and thus arguably easier to implement social distancing and other health measures?
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The member raises a very important point, and it's a very important sector, and that's why the focus of activity in developing guidance in Scotland is moving at pace. I refer to the work of my colleague Kevin Stewart, the Housing Minister, who is leading and co-chairing that construction forum, which is working indeed with subgroups to identify all the different areas that need to be worked on to give people confidence about return. So I do think, as you've seen in other parts of the world, that construction perhaps may be one that can move before others. I'm not saying what that phased recovery would look like and restart, and indeed in what order or indeed dates. But I think he raises a very important point, which is why that work is continuing at pace. All sectors we're looking at during this reset period, that guidance is going to be produced with business sectors and trade unions in every sector, but it is well developed in relation to the work on construction.
Thank you very much. Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, I'm sure you agree that newspapers are vital to maintaining community cohesion and morale at this time, reflecting the readers' activities whilst recognising their achievements and keeping them informed. However, the survival of some newspapers is in doubt, as many readers cannot get out to buy printed copies and advertising revenue plummets. While much of the assistance required to support newspapers is reserved, what will the Scottish Government do to assist local, regional and Scottish newspapers? For example, will ministers consider 100% rates relief for news publishers for the current financial year?
Cabinet Secretary.
I consider the request that the member has made. We're already in active dialogue with the newspaper industry. They're in a situation where they actually are vital for people to understand what's going on in relation to the COVID-19 crisis. They're not necessarily in the position, though some have done, is to furlough because they're actually wanting to keep active. Some of them, however, were vulnerable prior to COVID-19, so in consideration of support for the newspaper industry, we're going to have to look at all those areas. But I thank the member for raising the issue. We are in active discussions, and every suggestion and idea in terms of support will be considered. I can also commit that, since, as you mentioned, a number of these issues are reserved to the UK Government, that I will raise that as part of the quadrilateral meeting that I take part in, along with the Welsh, Northern Irish Government and the UK Minister.
Thank you very much. Colin Smith, to be followed by Gillian Martin.
And welcome to your new role. Whilst the vast majority of businesses have acted responsibly and stayed closed unless they're carrying out essential work, not all have done so, including Prestwick Aircraft Maintenance Limited, whose landlord is the Scottish Government. That company not only refused to furlough their workforce that would allow them to continue to pay at least 80% of wages, they're trying to impose a 50% pay cut on their workers, sacking those who refuse to agree to it. Does the Cabinet Secretary understand that they get away with this because the government guidance on what is essential business is not backed up in law? In the absence of legal underpinning to close such businesses, what is the Cabinet Secretary doing to fully enforce her own guidance, not least on companies based on government-owned land, such as Prestwick Airport?
Cabinet Secretary.
The member will be aware that Prestwick Airport operates commercially arm's length and independently from the Scottish Government. I have personally expressed my concern about the actions and activities that are taking place in the company that he referred to. I know Scottish Enterprise have brought to their attention the guidance. I'm not sure it's necessarily appropriate that that's their role, and that leads me to the point about what we might have to do going forward. Clearly, social distancing will be maintained even on return to some commercial activity. So therefore, how we improve that enforcement is going to be very important. And actually, I think as part of our rebuild in terms of our capacity and infrastructure, how organisations that are not precluded by law, because this Parliament agreed what companies should close by law, but we have appealed to ensure that if they're not part of an essential sector, that they should close. However, the arguments, as he is undoubtedly aware of, made by Prestwick Airport is that they are part of an essential sector. I think that is where the dispute currently lies.
Thank you very much. Gillian Martin, to be followed by Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome you to your new role. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, what's been done to help those who have been made redundant, either officially or notionally, by companies that refused to apply for furlough for them during the crisis? There seems to be a pattern, particularly in the North East, where we've got a low oil price compounding the situation. And I'm also hearing from many younger part-time workers who've lost income due to companies closing, but excluding them from furlough applications.
Cabinet Secretary.
The member raises a very serious situation. We have encouraged companies to furlough rather than make people redundant. I think there has been some scepticism and concern as to how effective the job retention scheme would be until it's in action. I think when people now see, as of yesterday, their job retention funding for wages coming through, it might make them pause and think again in relation to making people redundant. I also think there are a number of companies who don't want to get into debt for a variety of reasons and are not accessing the CBILS scheme. But the point about support is very relevant to our responsibilities. And so therefore the Partnership Action for Continuing Employment PACE, as you'll be aware, has made sure that with the restrictions on face-to-face contact, they are making adaptations to make sure they can still deliver. There's a marketing campaign to promote the service to individuals, as Gillian Martin refers to, who may need that support. There's also a helpline and other funding support in that area to make sure that those that are facing redundancy get the support that they need. But it is not necessarily a requirement that people have to make people redundant at this point in time. Furloughing is possible, and I would encourage those companies to think again if they have made those decisions or are making those decisions to make their staff redundant rather than entering the furlough system.
Thank you. Michelle Ballantyne, to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and congratulations on your appointment. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that many companies, particularly some of our SMEs, will struggle if this inability to go back to work extends beyond May into June. The grants that they get are extremely welcome, but that will not subsidise them going forward over a number of months. Can the Cabinet Secretary offer any reassurance to SMEs that they are going to be able to open during the summer?
Cabinet Secretary.
I don't think it's for me to decide at what point and what date that we move forward. I think that's something that we collectively will need to understand based on the scientific and health advice. I would say that it's not just about grants. There are other things that small businesses can rely on in terms of deferring capital debt. That's a good number of companies have done that rather than taking out the CBILS scheme, for example. There are other ways to try and reduce fixed costs. I note and welcome the extension of the job retention scheme into June as well, which would assist people in terms of wages. But as she said, we don't know what the future may hold in terms of the timing and the phasing of that restart and that recovery. But the most important thing now is to think about how we do that safely, and that's incumbent on every business. And I would encourage SMEs as well as other sectors to do so, to plan ahead.
Thank you very much. John Mason, to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you very much. Cabinet Secretary, I think there's been some mischief making by some opposition members about the business support package. And I just wonder if you could say whether the Scottish Government is providing more than the Barnett consequentials or less than the Barnett consequentials.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary Kate Forbes.
Answer unequivocally that we are providing more than Barnett consequentials in order to support business and ensure that our support is tailored to the particular challenges that are being faced in the Scottish economy. And last week, the announcement of a further £220 million worth of measures to help companies affected by the pandemic sees our support now start to fill the gaps in previously announced schemes as well as the UK government scheme. So I'm unaware, for example, of any other scheme in the UK that supports the newly self-employed. I'm unaware of other schemes that will see multiple properties funded in the £10,000 grant scheme. And so this additional support ensures that those that are struggling with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic and the business impact will be able to survive the next few weeks.
Thank you very much. Jackie Bailey, to be followed by David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Paul Sheeran, Chief Executive of Scottish Engineering, highlighted the confusion between the law and guidance in the Herald. Essentially, there is a divergence between the legal position in Scotland for those businesses that can continue, provided they take safety precautions, and the Scottish Government guidance, which is stronger and suggests closure. Whilst I understand that public health is the priority, there is genuine concern as manufacturing capacity is lost. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the guidance does not supersede the law?
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The law is the law, but as you will appreciate, we're moving at a very fast pace. Guidance is required, has been requested, and indeed the improved social distancing for businesses guidance that we produced was welcomed both by the business sector but also by trade unions.
Thank you very much. David Torrance, to be followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also offer my congratulations on your new role? Concerns have been raised that many people who have started jobs in March will not be eligible for the UK Government's job retention scheme, as they will not have been on the payroll until the end of the month. This will have a significant impact on seasonal and temporary workers, many of whom are being left out of the wage support altogether. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise what engagement the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government about closing the gap in this support scheme?
Thank you very much. Cabinet Secretary.
I personally raised that precise issue with the Chancellor in one of the regular calls we have with the UK Government just last week. I welcome the extension to the 19th of March. I would encourage them to think further, particularly for the needs of Scotland, where we have so many seasonal workers who would go on the books usually on the 1st of April. However, the explanation the Chancellor gave at that point in time was they didn't want to encourage anyone who employed people after the announcement of the date of the company jobs retention scheme to take advantage of that scheme. However, I think in the nature of the seasonal work, in an extension to the 1st of April, being quite limited in scope for exploitation, but capturing a large number of our seasonal workers, I think it's something I will continue to do, and I think it's something that still has merit.
Thank you very much. Rhoda Grant to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I also welcome you to your new post. Businesses tell me they're struggling due to the length of time it's taken to get promised support to them. And the Fraser of Allender Business Monitor tells us that 54% of businesses said they couldn't survive 3 months under these current conditions. Can I ask the Scottish Government if they'll examine how they can get payments to businesses much quicker and certainly within this month, and whether they will investigate whether the funding of the Scottish National Investment Bank can be used to support those businesses that say that they cannot survive 3 months under those conditions?
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary.
Speed is of the essence. It's been a cash flow issue for many companies, so getting grants out quickly has been imperative. I think the grant scheme that we've established, most councils started paying out from April the 6th to ensure they were in this tax year, which would have be of more benefit to companies, but also to ensure that the speed was such that they could be responsive. So I think in terms of what we're providing, from the Scottish Government's point of view, the speed of getting those grants are imperative. We've heard that from members as well. The new schemes I've just announced will work at speed as well, so therefore applications at the end of April to pay out in May. The point about the job retention scheme paying out this week should be of some assistance to those companies that she refers to who will have made those remarks before they started receiving the job retention scheme, which went live on Monday, and they're expecting within 6 working days to meet the end of April. But there are still real problems. That's why we need to see the data of the loan scheme, which we don't think is fully meeting the needs of Scottish businesses, and that's what we hear for small businesses in order to achieve that cash flow, to achieve those grants is important, but the loan system should have worked with them as a bridging mechanism to the grants and to the job retention scheme, and for too many companies that isn't happening, and that is why we're trying to make sure we supplement what we're doing, particularly for key anchor pivotal enterprises across Scotland, to make sure that they can survive, because as she said, many won't. And so therefore, although this is absolutely a public health crisis, what we are tackling now is an economic crisis.
Thank you very much. Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and welcome to the big chair. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if she will join me in congratulating the Government of Denmark for establishing the principle that firms based in tax havens will not be eligible for publicly funded bailouts? And would she like to apply the same principle here to whatever extent it is within the power of the Scottish Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think that principle is very important and certainly will reflect on whether and if it can be applied in any way in Scotland, although I'm not convinced that we necessarily have the powers to do so. The one thing I would just caution on, and it's a very important point in relation to the majority of the funding will go through the UK Government's job retention scheme, of which, of course, we have no power, although we try and influence it to make it better, as I've said. Now, why is that important? Is because it's about wage support and wage support going to individuals. it's absolutely imperative that any company that's receiving funding from the Job Retention Scheme passes that on and it goes to support the wages of workers in those companies. So I wouldn't want to see anything that deprived workers of wages and support, but I do think the principle of what has been done in Denmark is definitely worthy of an investigation.
Thank you very much. That concludes questions on this statement. My apologies to Neil Findlay and Claire Baker, as we simply now need to move on to next business.